Did you know that over 36 million lives have been lost to immune deficiency-related illnesses, and among them were some of the most iconic voices in black music history? From Eazy-E's raw, fearless rise out of Compton to Sylvester's glittering, unapologetic performances that lit up San Francisco stages, their music changed the world, but their battles remained largely hidden. In this video, we honor 20 legendary black musicians whose lives were tragically cut short by immune deficiency, but whose legacies continue to echo through every beat and lyric they left behind. Eazy-E. Eazy-E, born Eric Wright in the heart of Compton, California, wasn't just a rapper, he was a revolutionary. As the driving force behind NWA, he helped give birth to gangsta rap, a genre that didn't sugarcoat reality but instead threw it in your face. Through raw, unapologetic tracks like Straight Outta Compton, Eazy-E gave a voice to the streets, exposing the harsh truths about gangs, police brutality, and survival in America's forgotten neighborhoods. He didn't make feel-good music, he made real music. But Eazy-E wasn't just an artist, he was a visionary businessman. He founded Ruthless Records, proving he didn't need permission to succeed. He built his own empire and opened the door for other young black artists to be heard when no one else would listen. He carved his own lane and made sure others could walk through it too. In 1995, the world was stunned when Eazy-E announced he had been diagnosed with AIDS. Just weeks later, on March 26, he passed away at only 31 years old. His death shook the hip-hop world to its core, a painful reminder that no one is invincible. For many, it was the first time the AIDS crisis hit home. Eazy-E's legacy goes beyond music. He sparked conversations, broke barriers, and left a lasting impact that still echoes through hip-hop today. Fela Anikulapo Kuti. Fela Anikulapo Kuti wasn't from Compton. He was a revolutionary voice from the heart of Nigeria. While the world was tuning into hip-hop, Fela was creating something entirely his own, Afrobeat. It was more than music, it was a weapon. With bold rhythms, blaring horns, and unfiltered truth, Fela used his songs to call out corrupt leaders and military brutality. One of his most explosive tracks, Zombie, hit so hard it enraged the Nigerian army. His home, the Kalakuta Republic, wasn't just a house, it was a sanctuary of resistance, buzzing with rebellion and raw creativity. Fela didn't just talk about freedom, he lived it. He defied authority, married multiple women in one ceremony, and even ran for president. He broke every rule because the system was broken. But even revolutionaries are human. In August 1997, the world lost Fela. The cause? A disease linked to immunodeficiency. His brother, a respected doctor, made the announcement, something Fela himself never did. In a country where the illness was taboo, his silence spoke volumes. Fela didn't trust the medical system, and he stayed far from public health campaigns. Yet his death cracked open a conversation that had long been buried. If a giant like Fela could fall to this disease, it forced everyone to see the truth. No one is untouchable. Sylvester. Born in the gritty streets of Los Angeles, Sylvester James wasn't just a singer, he was a blazing force of nature. From an early age, his voice lit up church pews, but as he grew older, the same church that once welcomed him turned its back because he was gay. It broke his heart, but it also lit a fire in his soul. Refusing to be silenced, Sylvester packed his dreams and moved to San Francisco, a city alive with art, rebellion, and freedom. There, among drag queens, misfits, and visionaries, he found his tribe, and found himself. On stage, Sylvester didn't just perform, he soared. With his glittering outfits, high heels, and an ethereal falsetto that pierced the heavens, he became an icon of unapologetic self-expression. His anthem, You Make Me Feel Mighty Real, wasn't just a hit, it was a revolution. It gave people permission to live out loud, to dance, to feel seen. But when the AIDS crisis devastated his community in the 1980s, Sylvester didn't retreat into silence like many others. He rose to the moment, raising funds, speaking out, and offering hope. Even in his final days, he made sure his royalties would go toward helping those living with HIV. In 1988, at just 41, Sylvester passed away. But his funeral wasn't one of sorrow, it was a celebration. A burst of music, love, and fierce pride. To this day, his voice echoes through dance floors and hearts around the world. Sylvester didn't just sing, he made people feel mighty real and unafraid. Frankie Knuckles. Frankie Knuckles wasn't just a DJ, he was a healer with a turntable. Born in the Bronx, he began as an artist, but it was music that truly captured his heart. When he moved to Chicago in the late 1970s, he found his sanctuary at a club called The Warehouse. There, he mixed gospel, soul, and disco into something entirely new, what the world would come to know as house music. But to the Black and Latino gay community, it was more than sound, it was salvation. On Frankie's dance floor, people found freedom. They danced with tears, with joy, with abandon. His tracks like Your Love and Tears weren't just hits, they were emotional lifelines. Even as the shadow of immunodeficiency loomed over his community, and later his own health, Frankie kept spinning, never letting the music die. He rarely spoke about his condition, but his beats carried both his pain and his strength. When he passed in 2014, complications from diabetes and immunodeficiency took him, but they couldn't silence him. Chicago named a street in his honor, yet few spoke of the illness that helped claim his life. Frankie Knuckles gave more than music, he gave people a place to belong. His spirit lives on in every beat, every pulse of house. And if you listen closely, you'll still hear the sound of freedom, and the love he left behind. James Cleveland. James Cleveland, often called the King of Gospel, was born in Chicago, where church music flowed through the streets and into his soul. With a voice that thundered with power and stirred the deepest emotions, James transformed gospel into something bold, electrifying, and unforgettable. He fused the soul of Southern spirituals with the energy of urban sound, creating music that spoke to both tradition and change. For countless black churches, his songs were more than melodies, they were lifelines of hope. But James wasn't just a singer, he was a visionary. He led massive choirs that shook church rafters with glory, and his legendary album Peace Be Still moves listeners to tears decades later. A mentor to young artists and a trailblazer with over 100 albums and 3 Grammy wins, James didn't just perform gospel, he redefined it. Yet behind the soaring notes was a man living in quiet struggle. In an era unkind to those who were different, James never publicly spoke about his sexuality or the health battles he faced. When he passed away in 1991 at just 59, the official cause was heart failure, but later it was revealed he had an immune deficiency, likely AIDS. His death sent shockwaves through the gospel world. Some tried to hide the truth. Others finally began to speak it. James Cleveland's life was a symphony of triumph and silence, celebration and secrecy. Today, his voice still echoes in churches and homes, but so do the questions he left behind. And maybe, in those questions, lies a deeper truth we're still learning how to face. David Cole. David Cole was a quiet genius whose music made the world dance. Born in New York City, David was a classically trained pianist who fell in love with the energy of dance music. As a young DJ, he didn't just play records. He created joy, moving crowds with infectious rhythms that lit up the night. His true calling came when he partnered with Robert Clivels to form the iconic group C+C Music Factory. Their smash hit Gonna Make You Sweat, Everybody Dance Now, became an anthem, blasting through speakers at clubs, radios and parties everywhere. But David wasn't just a hitmaker, he was the heartbeat behind some of the biggest voices in music. He worked his magic on tracks for Mariah Carey, including Emotions, and Make It Happen, adding layers of soul and spirit. His talent touched legends like Whitney Houston and Aretha Franklin, yet David always stayed behind the scenes, letting the music speak louder than fame. Tragically, in 1995, David Cole passed away at just 32. While the official cause was spinal meningitis, the truth was tied to complications from an immune deficiency, an unspoken tragedy of the era. Though his name may not be widely known, his sound lives on. Every time a dance floor comes alive or a beat lifts your spirit, a part of David is still there. Quiet, powerful, eternal. Jermaine Stewart. Jermaine Stewart was never meant to blend in. He was born to stand out. From the moment he stepped onto the stage of Soul Train, the Ohio native turned heads with his electric dance moves and vibrant, fearless style. But Jermaine was more than just a dancer. He was a spirit of joy wrapped in bright colors and bold rhythm, determined to make people feel through his music. Before launching his solo career, he worked with groups like Shalimar and Culture Club, soaking in the sounds of the 80s while crafting his own message. Then came 1986, and the anthem that defined him, We Don't Have to Take Our Clothes Off. Beneath its infectious groove was a radical message. Love didn't need to be loud, fast, or reckless. It could be tender, thoughtful, real. At a time when pop music often pushed the opposite, Jermaine's voice was a gentle rebellion, wrapped in glitter and groove. He never fit the mold, and he never tried to. Jermaine sang with grace, danced with flair, and dressed with unapologetic flair. In an era that celebrated machismo, he showed that gentleness could be powerful too. As a black man who didn't follow the script, he became a quiet symbol of courage for anyone who ever felt different. He didn't have to shout to be heard, his truth spoke for itself. But like many bright stars, his light was dimmed too soon. After his big hit, the world slowly stopped listening. By the early 90s, his name faded from headlines. Still, Jermaine kept creating. He kept writing. He kept believing. Behind the scenes, though, he was fighting a silent battle. living with an immune deficiency at a time when the world wasn't ready to talk about it, especially not when it came to black artists. In 1997, Jermaine passed away at just 39. There were no tribute specials, no headlines. Just silence, the same silence that had surrounded his illness. But Jermaine Stewart's story deserves to be remembered. He wasn't just a one-hit wonder. He was a pioneer for those who didn't fit the box, those who led with heart instead of bravado. His music still echoes in movies and commercials, but it's his legacy of kindness, honesty, and quiet strength that truly endures. He didn't just sing a different tune. He was the tune, the rhythm of authenticity in a world that too often demanded masks. Keith Barrow. Keith Barrow was born into strength and raised in the spirit of justice. His mother wasn't just a parent. She was a powerhouse in the civil rights movement, marching and speaking out when silence was safer. Growing up in the heart of Chicago, Keith knew struggle, but he also knew hope. While others carried signs and gave speeches, Keith wielded a different kind of power, his voice. Smooth, soulful, and deeply stirring, his voice could stop a room cold. By the late 1970s, the world was starting to take notice. With hits like You Know You Want to Be Loved and Mr. Magic Man, Keith wasn't just climbing the charts, he was lighting them up. He signed a major record deal and poured his heart out on stages across America. His concerts weren't just shows, they were celebrations of love, truth, and joy. Keith wasn't becoming a star. He already was one, authentic, gifted, and unforgettable. But behind the spotlight, something darker was creeping in. A mysterious illness was silently spreading, and no one knew how to stop it. Doctors didn't understand it. The media didn't talk about it. And those suffering were often met with fear, not compassion. Keith was one of them. In the early 80s, his health began to fail. He had an immunodeficiency, what we now understand as AIDS. But back then, it was shrouded in stigma and silence. There were no treatments, no public outcry, no safety net, just a quiet, terrifying decline. Keith Barrow passed away in 1983 at only 29 years old. The world barely paused. The headlines didn't come. The industry moved on. And for a time, so did the world. But his voice, his beautiful, aching voice, never left. Today, people are rediscovering the magic he left behind. Songs filled with warmth, soul, and sincerity. Keith Barrow didn't get to sing long, but what he gave us still echoes. If you listen closely, you can still hear him. A voice that was once forgotten, now remembered. Forever. Bobby DeBarge. Bobby DeBarge had a voice that could stop time. Soft yet soaring, his falsetto wasn't just beautiful, it was haunting, raw, and unforgettable. As the lead singer of the group Switch, Bobby breathed life into classics like There'll Never Be and I Call Your Name, turning simple lyrics into soul-deep confessions. He didn't just perform, he bled emotion through every note, making listeners feel like he was singing directly to them. Humble and reserved, Bobby let his voice do the talking. And what a voice it was! Born into a gifted musical family, it seemed Bobby was destined for greatness. But behind the smooth harmonies and stage lights, he carried a storm few could see. He began using substances at a young age, a quiet escape from pain that fame would only intensify. Even as Switch rose to success, Bobby's demons followed closely. By the mid-1980s, after the group disbanded, his life unraveled. He tried to rebuild, collaborating with his siblings, reaching for a comeback, but addiction and legal troubles kept pulling him under. In 1988, Bobby was sentenced to prison for substance trafficking. It was behind bars that he received another devastating blow, a diagnosis of an immune deficiency, one heavily stigmatized and misunderstood at the time. Bobby never made it public. When he was released, he was already fading. In 1995, at just 39 years old, Bobby DeBarge passed away quietly, without the tributes or fanfare his talent deserved. No big memorials. No major headlines. Just silence. How does a voice so powerful, so full of longing and truth, become forgotten? Bobby gave his heart to music. But in the end, the world barely whispered his name. Kenny Green. Kenny Green had a voice that didn't just sing, it confessed. It was warm, raw, and intimate, like someone whispering a secret straight from the heart. As the lead singer of the R&B group Intro, Kenny helped shape the soulful sound of the early 90s, turning songs like Come Inside and Let Me Be the One into smooth, unforgettable anthems of love and longing. But he wasn't just the voice, he was the pen behind the lyrics, crafting harmonies that carried not just melody but meaning. His words spoke of love, fear, hope, and heartbreak with honesty that hit deep. Kenny even lent his gift to legends like Mary J. Blige, quietly proving that true artistry doesn't need to shout. But Kenny carried a burden the world wasn't ready to hear. In the late 90s, he was diagnosed with an immune deficiency. At first, he kept it hidden, because being black, gay, and sick in the music industry was a dangerous truth to tell. But in 2001, with quiet courage, he came forward in a rare interview. He spoke about his illness, his identity, and the heavy silence he'd lived under for years. It was an act of bravery few acknowledged. That same year, Kenny passed away at just 32. His death was quick, and heartbreakingly, the world barely paused. His name faded from headlines, but his voice, his soul, remains etched in the music. Kenny Green didn't just make songs. He made truth sound beautiful. And in the end, his greatest legacy wasn't fame, it was honesty, love, and the courage to finally be seen. Alvin Ailey. Alvin Ailey was more than just a dancer. He was a movement, a force of truth wrapped in rhythm and soul. Born into the deep hardships of the segregated South, Alvin grew up in a world where being black meant battling both visible chains and invisible pain. But in that struggle, he found a soundtrack: gospel, blues, and spirituals. These weren't just songs, they were survival. They told stories of sorrow, resilience, and undying hope. And Alvin carried them deep in his bones. When he founded the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater, he didn't just choreograph dances, he painted portraits of the black experience. His masterpiece, Revelations, wasn't just art, it was a testimony. Every leap, every reach, every fall was drenched in history and emotion. Grief, joy, resistance, and rebirth. Through music by legends like Nina Simone and Duke Ellington, Alvin turned the stage into sacred ground, a place for mourning, healing, and remembering. But while he gave voice to generations through dance, Alvin lived a quiet battle of his own. As a gay black man in a time when truth could cost you everything, he carried his identity in silence. When AIDS began to erode his health in the 1980s, Alvin asked his doctor not to list the disease on his death certificate, afraid of the shame it might bring, not to him, but to others. Even in death, he protected the world that didn't always protect him. Today, his name still commands stages across the globe. His company still dances, still testifies. But behind the applause was a man who bore greatness and grief in equal measure. One can't help but wonder, how much more could he have given, if the world had only let him be freely Alvin Ailey? Melvin Lindsay. Melvin Lindsay didn't sing a note or strum a chord, but he forever changed the rhythm of how we listen. In a modest Washington, D.C. radio booth, late into the night, Melvin tried something different. He spun soft R&B, soulful ballads, and tender love songs, calling it the quiet storm. But this storm didn't roar, it whispered. It wrapped listeners in warmth, nostalgia, and calm in a world that often felt too loud. With a velvety voice that felt like a friend, Melvin curated music that touched memories and mended hearts. His show wasn't just radio, it was refuge. At a time when stations chased noise and speed, Melvin offered stillness and soul. The quiet storm swept across the country, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, all tuning in to this new sound. Legends like Anita Baker and Luther Vandross found a sanctuary in his playlists. But Melvin's own story ended far too soon. At just 36, he quietly succumbed to an immunodeficiency illness, never seeking the spotlight, never making headlines. Like the fading echo of a love song, he slipped away. Yet the storm he started never stopped. His voice may be gone, but its echoes still hum through late-night airwaves. His legacy lives not in fame, but in feeling. So close your eyes, listen closely. Can you still hear the quiet storm? The Dynamic Superiors. The Dynamic Superiors, and the brilliance of Tony Washington. Loud, proud, and impossible to ignore. That's how Tony Washington burst onto the scene in the 1970s. As the lead singer of the Dynamic Superiors, Tony gave the world more than just music, he gave it truth. With his soaring, silky falsetto and glittering wardrobe of satin, sequins, and confidence, he refused to hide who he was. Tony was a proud black man who loved openly, dressed boldly, and sang with unfiltered soul. But the music industry wasn't ready for someone like him. Yes, he had undeniable talent. Yes, his group signed with Motown. And yes, their hit Shoe Shoe Shine made waves. But still, they were sidelined, rarely booked on national TV, denied major tours, and quietly pushed to the background. The world seemed eager to hear Tony's voice, but not to see the man behind it. Tony never hid that he was queer, even when it cost him. The powers that be never celebrated his bravery, they just ignored it. As the 1980s rolled in, his star began to fade. The world moved on. Tony kept singing, but the spotlight had dimmed. Then, in 1990, he passed away from an immunodeficiency illness. No headlines. No tributes. No grand farewell. Just silence. But his story didn't end there. Tony Washington mattered. His music mattered. He was a spark of light in an era of shadows, a fearless artist who paved the way for the freedom we now see in today's performers. The glitter he wore, the love he refused to hide, the voice that defied expectations, they all echo in the bold, unapologetic artists of today. And though the world once tried to forget him, his spirit sings louder than ever.
Lonnie Pitchford.
Lonnie Pitchford grew up in the heart of Mississippi, where music wasn't just sound, it was survival, history, and soul. From a young age, he didn't chase fame or fancy instruments. Instead, he crafted magic from a single wire nailed to a wooden board, his humble diddly bow. To most, it was just a toy. But in Lonnie's hands, it became a voice for the ancestors, a living thread tying the roots of the Delta blues to a new generation. He didn't just play music, he honored it, protected it, kept it alive. Every note he struck was like opening a time capsule, transporting listeners to dusty porches and juke joints long forgotten. He was a bridge between centuries, between the ghosts of the past and the beats of the future. In 1998, Lonnie passed away quietly from an immune deficiency at just 43 years old.
No headlines.
No tribute concerts. Just silence. But Lonnie left behind something greater than fame. He left a legacy. A gift. His music still echoes through time, reminding us that even the simplest sound can carry the weight of a people's story.
Billy Wright.
Billy Wright wasn't just a singer, he was a force of nature. In the 1940s and 50s, his electrifying performances lit up the South, captivating audiences with a voice that could shake the walls and a presence that refused to be ignored. Dubbed the Prince of the Blues, Billy was more than a title, he was a trailblazer. Born in Atlanta, he got his start in traveling tent shows, blending gospel, blues, and soul into a sound so raw and emotional, it stopped people in their tracks. Songs like Blues for My Baby and You Satisfy weren't just music, they were confessions sung straight from the heart.
Billy was bold.
He wore glittering suits, towering hair, and eyeliner before it was ever accepted. Back when such self-expression was risky, even dangerous.
But Billy didn't flinch.
He lived out loud, and his authenticity made him unforgettable. He even took a young, unknown dreamer under his wing, a teenager named Little Richard, teaching him how to command a stage and believe in his own brilliance. And yet, when Billy disappeared from the spotlight, the world barely noticed.
No headlines. No tribute.
Just silence. But his legacy runs deeper than fame. Billy Wright helped shape the sound of a generation. He dared to be himself in a world that demanded conformity. He didn't just sing the blues, he lived them with courage, fire, and style that still echoes today.
Larry Smith.
Larry Smith wasn't the frontman, and he never sang a single note, but his drumming was the heartbeat of Fat Larry's band. Behind the smooth sound of their iconic hit Zoom was Larry's rhythm, steady, soulful, and full of life. His hands and feet moved with precision and passion, creating beats that made the music not just heard but felt. Though quiet and unassuming, Larry "Legs" Smith was the soul behind the sound, especially in his hometown of Philadelphia, where fellow musicians knew him as reliable, humble, and deeply talented. He wasn't one for the spotlight, but when he sat behind the drum kit, the music came alive. In an era when few talked openly about immune deficiency, especially black men in the music world, Larry carried his illness in silence. The fear of judgment and isolation kept him quiet, even as his health declined. Still, he played as long as he could, until the music finally slipped away. In 1995, Larry passed away from complications related to immune deficiency. There were no headlines, no grand tributes. Just a quiet departure. But his rhythm lives on. People still play Zoom, still move to its groove, often without knowing the man who gave it its pulse. Larry Smith deserves to be remembered, not just as a drummer, but as the quiet force who made the music unforgettable. Wilmer Little Axe Broadnax. Wilmer Little Axe Broadnax had a voice that could silence a room. When he sang, time seemed to pause. With powerhouse gospel groups like the Spirit of Memphis Quartet and the Five Blind Boys of Mississippi, his voice soared, raw, heartfelt, and filled with soul. Every note carried joy, hope, and healing. On stage, he stood with pride and conviction, a beacon of strength in the gospel world. But behind that powerful presence was a deeply guarded truth. Wilmer was born a girl, yet lived his entire life as a man, a reality he kept hidden in an era, and in a genre, where tradition left little room for difference. In the tight-knit, conservative world of gospel music, that secret was a matter of survival. In the early 1990s, Wilmer passed away due to complications from an immune deficiency. His death was quiet, almost too quiet. Few spoke of him, and fewer still honored his legacy. It wasn't until a police report surfaced after his death that his truth came to light, sending shockwaves through those who once stood in awe of his gift. Wilmer sang to lift others up, to bring light into dark places. But when his own light faded, the world failed to give him the dignity and respect he had long earned. His story is a haunting reminder that even the brightest voices can be silenced, not by death, but by society's refusal to see the full truth of who they were. Sterling St. Jacques. Sterling St. Jacques wasn't just a man, he was a force. Bright, bold, and electric, like a comet blazing across the sky. One of the first black male models to command the world's most prestigious runways, Sterling didn't just walk, he owned every step. Cameras clicked.
Heads turned.
Time seemed to pause when he entered a room. From Paris to Milan to New York, no city could contain his fire. But Sterling wanted more than flashing lights and fashion shows. He found his second home under the glittering pulse of disco. In nightclubs filled with sweat, soul, and freedom, he gave the world music that made you feel. Music that made you dance like no one was watching. Europe embraced him, not just for his talent, but for his truth.
He lived loudly. He loved freely.
He was unapologetically gay at a time when silence felt safer, but silence was never his style. Sterling wore what he wanted.
Loved who he wanted.
Danced like the night was his stage, and it was. He was surrounded by dreamers, rebels, and artists, and he broke every rule society tried to place on him. His life was a living declaration: be brave.
Be bold. Be you.
Sterling St. Jacques may be gone, but his spirit never faded. He's there in every black model strutting with pride. He's there in every club where someone dances without fear. He was more than a model.
He was a movement.
A mirror for anyone brave enough to live out loud. Robert Nighthawk. Robert Nighthawk had a voice that could silence a room. When he sang in the small, humble churches of Alabama and Mississippi, it felt like heaven paused to listen. Born Robert Darby, he didn't just perform, he stirred souls. Every note he sang, every choir he led, carried a force that lifted people from despair and wrapped them in joy. His music wasn't just sound, it was salvation. Raised in the heart of the Black Pentecostal church, Robert understood that music wasn't entertainment, it was a sacred dialogue with God.
He never chased fame.
He didn't seek stages or spotlights. But even in the shadows, people whispered. Rumors swirled about who he was, about whether he was gay, whispers born of ignorance, not truth. So Robert stayed silent.
He chose grace. He chose to serve.
Even as his body weakened, his spirit never did. He kept leading choirs, kept traveling town to town, sharing his gift until his final breath. In 1994, Robert passed away from an immunodeficiency illness. There were no headlines, no eulogies on television. Just a quiet service, a few tearful voices, and the echo of a life that mattered deeply to those who knew. The world may not remember his name, but the churches still sing his songs. The dusty cassette tapes still play his voice. And in every note, Robert Darby lives on. Not as a star, but as a saint of sound, a healer in harmony, whose faith rang louder than any rumor.
Tony Richardson.
Tony Richardson was the kind of singer who made people stop mid-conversation, close their eyes, and feel. Raised just outside Detroit, the heartbeat of soul, Tony's roots ran deep in gospel and grit. He started singing in church pews, but his voice soon found its way into dimly lit, smoke-filled clubs, where he didn't sing for the charts, he sang to speak his truth. By the 1970s, Tony had become a quiet legend in underground circles. He never chased the spotlight, never craved fame. He simply sang because his soul demanded it. But behind that haunting voice was a man quietly battling an illness that, at the time, carried shame and silence, especially within the black music community. So Tony withdrew from the crowds. He kept performing, but only in small, intimate rooms where his softening voice somehow carried even more weight. Every note he sang felt like a whispered goodbye, even when the audience had no idea what he was really saying. Tony passed away in the late 1990s.
No headlines. No awards.
Just silence. But for those who had heard him, those lucky enough to feel his presence, his absence was deafening. His songs live on in dusty tapes, faded memories, and the hearts he touched. Tony never needed a stage to shine, he helped others find their light. And in doing so, his voice became eternal. That's a wrap for today's video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit like, leave a comment, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world and gives me the motivation to keep creating more content. Thanks so much for watching.